Hello. There's a certain power in routine. It lulls you into a sense of security, tricks you into believing you've got it all figured out. That's how I lived, structured, disciplined, successful. I built my own company from the ground up, making it one of the top private firms in the state. And right beside me was my wife, Sarah, the perfect partner in business and life. Or so I thought. If someone had told me a year ago that my marriage was a ticking time bomb, I would have laughed in their face. Sarah and I weren't the type to have dramatic fights. We had what people envied, a marriage built on respect, trust, and a shared empire. But trust is a funny thing. You don't realize how fragile it is until it shatters. The first crack appeared on an otherwise normal afternoon. I was reviewing financial reports in my office when Sarah walked in, her tone casual but her eyes sharp, scanning me for a reaction before she even spoke. "We need a new CFO," she said, slipping into the chair across from me. "And I know the perfect candidate." I nodded absent-mindedly, still focused on the report. "Go on." She hesitated, just for a second. And if I had been paying closer attention, I might have noticed the slight tremor in her voice before she said the words that changed everything. "It's Mark." My pen froze mid-signature. I looked up, confused. "Mark, your ex-husband, Mark." She smiled, but it was forced. "Yes. He's got the experience, the qualifications, and—" "No," I said it before she could finish, my gut already screaming that this was a bad idea. Sarah sighed, tilting her head like I was some overreacting child. "John, don't be ridiculous. Mark has worked as CFO for 2 major firms. He's the best option." I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. "Out of all the people in the world, you want to hire the man you used to sleep with? Is that supposed to be a joke?" Sarah's expression hardened. "This isn't about our history. This is about what's best for the company. You always say we should hire the best, regardless of personal feelings. Well, this is me following that rule." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. There was something too rehearsed about her pitch, like she had prepared for this conversation in front of a mirror. Like she was expecting me to resist. "Sarah," I said slowly, "I'm not comfortable with this." Her smile turned saccharine. "Then don't think of him as my ex-husband. Think of him as the best CFO we can get." I exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of my nose. Logic battled with instinct. From a business standpoint, it was a solid move. Mark had an impressive resume. But from a personal standpoint, this was a train wreck waiting to happen. Still, Sarah had never given me a reason not to trust her. I wasn't the jealous type. If I was going to say no, I needed a real reason, not just the sour taste in my mouth. After a long pause, I finally nodded. "Fine. On a trial basis." Sarah's entire body relaxed. "You won't regret it." But as she left my office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I would. The first few weeks passed uneventfully, at least on the surface. Mark slipped into the company with ease, charming the employees, earning their trust. And for a while, I convinced myself that my paranoia had been misplaced. Then, small things started to change. Sarah's schedule became erratic. Late meetings. Business dinners I wasn't invited to. Subtle shifts in how she spoke to me, less warmth, more distance. I brushed it off at first. We were both busy. Running a company together wasn't a fairy tale romance, it was work. But then, one night, she came home late, her cheeks flushed, the faintest whiff of cologne on her clothes. And it wasn't mine. I didn't say anything. Not yet. But the crack had widened. And the foundation of my perfect life? It was already crumbling. Mark slipped into the company like a snake slithering into a warm den. Effortlessly. Charismatically. Too easily. On paper, he was perfect for the job, years of experience, a stellar track record, a sharp mind for finance. But I wasn't looking at his resume. I was looking at him. And I didn't like what I saw. I watched him shake hands with our employees, laughing at the water cooler, weaving himself into the fabric of the company like he had been there all along. The way he commanded a room was unsettling. People gravitated toward him, hypnotized by his effortless charm. Including Sarah. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. A stolen glance here, a hushed conversation there. It was all business, right? They had history, but that was ancient. Sarah and I had been married for years. There was nothing to worry about. At least, that's what I tried to believe. But the little things started adding up. Sarah started dressing differently for work, sharper, sleeker. Clothes she hadn't worn in years, ones she used to wear when she wanted to impress me. She spent longer getting ready in the morning, spritzing herself with the expensive perfume she only used for special occasions. I noticed the way Mark looked at her. Not in the way a coworker looks at a colleague, but in the way a man looks at something he's already claimed. The first time I caught them alone in her office, the door was cracked open just enough for me to hear them whispering. "Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything?" Mark asked. Sarah laughed, a light, airy sound that sent a sickening feeling crawling up my spine. "He doesn't have a clue." I could have walked in right then. I could have demanded answers, confronted them both, thrown a chair through the window. But I didn't. Because deep down, I wasn't ready to hear the truth. So I stepped back, swallowed the lump in my throat, and convinced myself I was overreacting. The distance between Sarah and me grew like an invisible wall. It wasn't just that she worked late more often. It wasn't just that she stopped calling me during the day. It was something colder. Something deeper. She didn't touch me anymore. Not absent-mindedly while passing by. Not at night before bed. Not even when I reached for her first. And the laughter, God, the laughter hurt the most. Sarah used to laugh at everything I said. Even the dumb jokes. Even the ones she'd heard 100 times. It was one of the things I loved most about her. But now, I could barely get a smirk out of her. Then, one night, I heard it. I was in my office late, finishing up reports, when I heard Sarah's voice through the wall. Muffled. But laughing. A real, full, intoxicating laugh. I stood up and stepped closer to the wall. The laughter came again. And then his voice, Mark's voice, deep, smooth, sliding through the air like poison. I didn't hear what he said. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out of my office, down the hall, straight to Sarah's door. My heart pounded against my ribs, my fingers twitching with adrenaline. I hesitated. Just for a second. Then I pushed the door open. Sarah was sitting on the edge of her desk, Mark leaning just a little too close. The way they looked at me, startled, almost guilty, said everything I needed to know. "Oh, hey, babe," Sarah said, her voice too casual, too smooth. "We were just going over projections." Mark grinned, leaning back in his chair. Yeah, Sarah was just showing me all the details. I stared at them, at the space between them that felt like it had just been occupied by something I wasn't supposed to see. And in that moment, I knew. I was losing my wife. I just didn't know how much further I had left to fall. I've never been the paranoid type. I built my company, my life, and my marriage on logic and trust. But trust is like a glass of whiskey, smooth and solid until someone shatters it on the floor. And Sarah? She had just sent mine crashing. For weeks, I tried to ignore the signs. The late nights. The hushed conversations. The way she and Mark shared little, knowing glances like they had a private joke. But it was this night, sitting in the dim glow of our bedroom, that I decided I had to know. No more excuses. No more denial. Sarah was in the shower, steam curling out from under the bathroom door. Her phone sat face down on the nightstand, innocent, silent. But my gut was screaming at me, check it. Now. I picked it up, my heart thundering in my chest. Sarah had always been careful. No notifications on the lock screen, no incriminating messages left open. But everyone has blind spots. And Sarah's? She never logged out of Facebook. I opened the app and tapped on her messages. My hands were steady, but my stomach twisted like I was about to jump off a cliff. Then I saw it. A conversation with Mark. My eyes darted across the words, my breath catching in my throat. Mark, I miss you. Today was torture. Sarah, I know, baby. I hate pretending in front of him, but soon it'll all be over. I can't wait to be with you. I froze. My brain refused to process what I was reading. I stared at the words, willing them to change, to mean something else. But they didn't. I kept scrolling, my fingers moving faster, desperate for context, for something to make this not what it looked like. Mark, once we finalize the accounts, we'll be free. He won't even see it coming. Sarah, he's too distracted. He still thinks I love him. God, it's almost funny. Mark, not funny. Pathetic. Sarah, yeah. But soon, we'll drain him dry. The company will be ours, and he'll be out in the cold. Then it's just you and me. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a coup. My own wife. The woman I built my life with. She was planning to take everything. My throat felt tight, my vision tunneling. Every instinct screamed at me to storm into the bathroom, shove the phone in her face, demand an explanation. But I didn't. I forced my hands to steady. Took a slow, controlled breath. And carefully, deliberately, put the phone back exactly where I found it. Because now I knew the truth. And Sarah? She had no idea that I knew. I barely slept that night. My mind was a hurricane of rage, betrayal, and the cold, calculated need to figure out my next move. By morning, I had made my decision. I needed more information. I needed to be smart. So I did what I always did when life got too messy, I tried to act normal. I went through the motions. Coffee. A quick kiss on the cheek for Sarah. A half-hearted conversation about some corporate event she was too busy to attend with me. And then, later that evening, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat down with our daughter, Emma. She was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging me as I sat beside her. Hey, kiddo, I said, keeping my tone light. Got a second? She sighed dramatically, like I had just ruined her entire existence. What's up? I hesitated. How do you feel about Mark being around again? She shrugged, still glued to her phone. I dunno. He's cool, I guess. Cool. I tried not to grit my teeth. You don't think it's weird? Him working with your mom? I pressed. Another shrug. Not really. Then she glanced up, her expression unreadable. Mom's happy. 2 words. Simple. Harmless. But they hit me like a hammer. Mom's happy. Not we are happy. Not you and Mom. Just. Mom. She didn't have to say it outright. She was fine with all of this. Fine with him. Fine with whatever the hell was going on. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I forced a smile. That's good. I just wanted to check in. Emma nodded, already tuning me out, her attention back on her phone. I sat there a moment longer, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My daughter wasn't going to be on my side. She wasn't going to see Sarah for what she really was. I was alone in this. And if I was going to take Sarah and Mark down, I had to do it alone. For a whole week, the messages I read burned into my brain like a hot brand on my skin. I hate to pretend to him, but it will be over soon. I can't wait to be together. I kept thinking about it, recalling the same messages over and over again, as if in some parallel world they could mean something different. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, the truth remained the same. Sarah wasn't just cheating. She was conspiring. And she was winning. And I noticed things I had been too blind to see before. Sarah never parked next to Mark. No, that would be too obvious. But she always arrived right after him. Never together, but always close. They didn't go to lunch in the same car, but they always left within minutes of each other. I started following her, keeping my distance, driving past the restaurants where they had their meetings. Watching through the windows as they sat in a back corner, heads close together. She never looked at me like that anymore. One night, when she said she had work to catch up on, I drove past the office. Her car was there. Mark's car was there. The lights in her office were off. I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in short, controlled bursts. I could feel the anger threatening to take over, to force me out of the car, up the stairs, and through the door. But I didn't move. Not yet. Then, finally, the moment came. It was late. Sarah was asleep again, her body curled away from me. I hadn't checked her phone since that first night, I didn't need to. But tonight, I needed more. I waited. Made sure her breathing was deep and steady. Then I reached for her phone. This time, I didn't go to her messages. I went to deleted messages for the past week. And there it was. A thread she had erased just hours earlier. Mark, are you sure you can sneak away tomorrow? Sarah, yes. He still has no idea. He trusts me completely. Mark, good. I'll book the hotel under a different name, just in case. Sarah, you worry too much. By the time he figures anything out, we'll already be in control. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. My pulse wasn't racing. Instead, there was nothing. Just cold. Empty. Like something inside me had finally broken. I put the phone back, rolled over, and stared at the wall. The next morning, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pain, not even anticipation, just a steady, icy resolve. I left early, moving through the motions of my routine like a man walking toward his own execution. The weight of the truth sat heavy in my chest, but there was no more room for doubt, no more space for second-guessing. Today, I would see it with my own eyes. Today, the last remaining illusion of my marriage would be shattered beyond repair. I arrived at the office before anyone else, but Sarah was already there. So was Mark. That wasn't unusual, after all, they had been working together for months now, and Sarah often claimed she had early meetings to prepare for. The difference was that this time, I knew exactly what was happening behind that door. I moved quietly down the hall, my footsteps barely making a sound against the polished floors. My heart pounded in my ears, but my mind remained cold, detached, as if I were floating outside of my own body, watching myself walk toward the inevitable. And then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic creaking. A muffled moan. My breath caught in my throat as Sarah's voice, breathy and desperate, spilled through the closed office door. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, faster, deeper. The words slammed into me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, but I didn't hesitate. I didn't stop to think. I didn't let myself feel. I grabbed the handle and pushed the door open. The sight before me burned itself into my brain like a brand. Sarah, sprawled out on her desk, her legs wrapped around Mark's waist, her skirt bunched up around her hips, her blouse unbuttoned and hanging open. Her head was thrown back, her lips parted, her nails digging into his shoulders as she rocked against him. The smell of sweat and sex hung thick in the air, clinging to my skin like a second betrayal. Time slowed to a crawl. Mark froze mid-thrust, his face going pale, his mouth opening and closing like a gasping fish. Sarah's head snapped toward me, her hair wild, her lipstick smeared. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, something flashed in her eyes, shock, maybe even fear. And then, unbelievably, she laughed. A short, cruel chuckle that turned into a full-bodied, unrestrained laugh. Well, she scoffed, adjusting herself without an ounce of shame, I guess the charade is over. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, staring at her, at them, at the wreckage of my life sprawled across that desk like some cheap, sordid affair in a second-rate motel. Mark had the decency to scramble off her, fumbling with his pants, his face flushed with shame. But Sarah? She just smirked, swinging her legs off the desk as if I had merely walked in on an innocent conversation instead of catching her in the act. You know, John, she said, smoothing down her skirt, I was wondering when you'd finally figure it out. My mouth was dry. My hands shook. My entire world was tilting on its axis, but I refused to let her see me break. How long? I finally managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. She shrugged. Does it really matter? I could feel the rage simmering just beneath the surface, threatening to crack through the icy exterior I had forced around myself. Does it really matter? She had taken everything, my trust, my love, my company, my dignity, and she had the audacity to act like this was nothing more than an inconvenience. Mark cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably beside her, but he didn't say a word. Coward. Sarah sighed, rolling her eyes. Oh, don't look at me like that, John. You had to know things weren't great between us. I mean, come on. We barely even have sex anymore. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. So that's your excuse. You weren't getting enough, so you decided to screw him. I jabbed a finger in Mark's direction, watching as he flinched like the spineless little worm he was. She smirked again. Don't be so dramatic. This was going to happen one way or another. You just made it easier by being so predictable. Predictable. That word dug under my skin like a splinter. I had spent years building a life with this woman, giving her everything, trusting her with every part of me, and now she stood in front of me, half-dressed, mocking me, as if I were some clueless idiot who had been getting in the way of her happiness. I wanted to yell. To smash something. To wipe that smug expression off her face. But I didn't. Instead, I took a step back, nodding slowly, the realization settling deep into my bones. I wasn't going to fight for her. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I wasn't going to waste another second of my life on a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be rid of. Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving Sarah half-naked on her desk, Mark scrambling to zip up his pants, and the remains of my marriage crumbling into dust behind me. She wanted the charade to be over. Fine. But she had no idea what was coming next. I drove home alone. I didn't slam the door on my way out of the office, didn't make a scene, didn't give Sarah the satisfaction of watching me break. No, I left her there, half-dressed, tangled with Mark, probably laughing at how easily I had been played. But if she thought I was walking away in defeat, she was dead wrong. I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine. I wasn't going to crawl into bed beside her like a pathetic fool and smile through gritted teeth. I wasn't about to give her hope that I'd accept this, that I'd be the kind of man who would work through it, or be reasonable. That wasn't me. I walked into the house, straight past the living room, and found my daughter, Emma, curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up as I sat down next to her. Hey, kiddo, I said, my voice tight. She hummed in acknowledgement, fingers still tapping at the screen. I took a deep breath. I didn't want to drag her into this, but she deserved to know the truth. She was old enough to understand. And selfishly, I needed someone on my side. "Listen, there's something we need to talk about," I said. "It's about your mother." That got her attention. She finally glanced at me, eyes wary. "What about her?" I hesitated. For a split second, I considered softening it, easing her into it. But why? Sarah hadn't softened the blow for me. She hadn't hesitated when she spread her legs for Mark in our office. She didn't deserve protection. "She's having an affair," I said flatly. "With Mark." Emma blinked. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered, something I couldn't quite read. "Okay," she said. I frowned. "Okay." She shrugged, locking her phone and setting it aside. "I mean, she deserves to be happy, Dad." The words hit like a gunshot to the chest. "What?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. She sighed, like this conversation was already exhausting her. "You and Mom haven't been happy for a long time. Maybe this is what she needs." "Maybe she." "You think this is what she needs?" I snapped. "Sneaking around behind my back. Screwing her ex in my office. Planning to take everything from me." Emma folded her arms, jaw tightening. "I don't know, Dad. Maybe if you had made her happy, she wouldn't have had to look somewhere else." I stared at her, stunned into silence. All I had wanted was support. A shred of understanding. Something to remind me that I wasn't losing everything, that I wasn't completely alone in this. But instead, my own daughter sat there, looking at me like I was the bad guy. Like I was the reason her mother was a cheating, backstabbing snake. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to nod. "Got it," I muttered, standing up. "Dad." "No, I get it," I cut her off. "Your mother deserves to be happy. And I guess Mark is what makes her happy." I let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Well, I hope she enjoys it while it lasts." Emma frowned. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. Because right then, I made my decision. Sarah and Mark had already started their process, the process of taking everything from me. My company. My dignity. My life's work. It was time I started mine. I grabbed my phone and walked out of the room. There was work to do. And by the time I was finished, neither Sarah nor Mark would have anything left. The day started like any other, for them. I imagined Sarah waking up in her own smug little bubble, stretching out in my bed, thinking she had played me for a fool. Maybe she even had breakfast with Emma, sipping coffee, pretending she was still the loving wife, the devoted mother. And Mark? Mark Holloway was probably standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, grinning like he was untouchable. Like today was just another step toward stealing everything I built. They had no idea. I had spent the past few weeks weaving my own web, pulling every string, setting every trap. The moment I found those messages, I stopped being John Lancaster, the loyal husband. I became something else, something colder. Something dangerous. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. He wasn't just any attorney, I had used him for years to handle high-stakes business deals, and he was ruthless when it came to corporate warfare. We spent hours combing through contracts, company bylaws, and legal loopholes. My company wasn't just mine by title, I had structured it in a way that gave me complete control in the event of fraud or misconduct. Sarah and Mark had no idea that by scheming to take over, they had walked right into a legal noose. Then, I hired forensic accountants. I knew they had been playing with company funds, moving money into accounts they thought I wouldn't notice. But I did notice. I tracked every transfer, every suspicious invoice, every cent they had tried to siphon off. By the time I was done, I had enough evidence to not only fire them, but to bury them. Next, I locked down the company. Every account Sarah had access to. Frozen. Every document Mark had been working on. Seized. I revoked their credentials, erased their emails, changed every password. By the time they stepped foot in the office this morning, they were ghosts, stripped of power, stripped of access, stripped of everything they thought they controlled. And then, I let them walk right into the ambush. They arrived together, like they always did. Sarah with her fake professionalism, Mark with that disgusting overconfidence that made me want to put my fist through his teeth. They didn't even hesitate when they reached the front entrance. Not until security stepped forward. Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Lancaster, the head of security greeted them, voice clipped, professional. You need to come with us. I wish I had been there to see their faces. The moment realization flickered across Sarah's expression. The way Mark probably stiffened beside her, already scrambling for an explanation. What? Sarah scoffed. This must be a mistake. No mistake, ma'am, the guard said, holding out a stack of papers. You've been served. She took them, hands shaking slightly. And then it hit her. Legal action. Immediate termination. Transfer of company shares. Everything spelled out in cold, unforgiving detail. Sarah wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what this meant. No, this isn't right, she muttered, flipping through the pages, looking for a way out. Mark, ever the arrogant idiot, stepped forward. This is bullshit, he snapped. You can't do this. Another set of papers landed in his hands. His face paled as he read through them. Fraud. Misconduct. Corporate espionage. Every charge laid out, every action accounted for. I had been busy. Sarah swallowed hard, her voice dropping. Where's John? The security guard didn't answer. He didn't have to. They tried to fight it. Sarah demanded to speak to HR, Mark threatened legal action. But it was useless. Every move they could have made, I had already anticipated. Every path they could have taken, I had already blocked. Sir, the guard cut in, unimpressed, you're going to need to leave the premises immediately. You son of a bitch, Mark growled, realization settling in. And Sarah? She just stood there, staring at the papers, her perfect little world collapsing around her. I imagined her mind racing, trying to piece together how this had happened. Trying to figure out when I had stopped being the pathetic husband she thought she could manipulate and started becoming the man who ruined her. But they didn't stop. No, they stormed straight toward my office, righteous in their belief that they were in control. The door flew open without a knock. Mark led the charge, his face already twisted with fury, the stack of legal papers in his fist crumpled from how tightly he had been gripping them. Sarah was a step behind him, paler than usual, her confidence fraying at the edges but still holding on, still believing she could somehow talk her way out of this. What the hell is this? Mark spat, slamming the documents onto my desk like he had just pulled a smoking gun from his briefcase. I leaned back in my chair, slow, deliberate, and took a sip of my coffee before answering. That? I said, nodding toward the papers. That's your downfall, Mark. His nostrils flared. You froze the accounts. You cut us off from company funds. Do you have any idea what you've done? I smiled. Oh, I know exactly what I've done. I've taken back what's mine. Sarah's voice cut in, sharp, desperate. John, this is insane. You can't just. I can, I interrupted, turning my gaze to her, my tone steel. And I did. You see, Sarah, unlike you, I actually read the contracts I sign. And what you failed to realize when you started this little coup is that I built this company with a failsafe. A clause that allows me to remove anyone engaging in fraudulent behavior, without notice, without payout, and without recourse. I picked up the legal documents and tossed them back at Mark. So congratulations, you played yourselves. Mark's jaw clenched. You think this is over? You think I won't fight this? I chuckled, shaking my head. Oh, Mark. Fight it how? You committed fraud. You siphoned funds. You plotted to take over a company you had no legal claim to. And Sarah, I turned back to her, watching as she stiffened, her mask cracking. Oh, Sarah, you really thought you were going to walk away with everything, didn't you? My money, my company, my reputation. You were going to watch me fall and laugh about it. I tilted my head. Laugh like you did when I caught you screwing him on your desk. Her face went white. I pressed on. But see, here's the problem, you underestimated me. You assumed I would crumble. You assumed I would roll over and let you take what I built. But you were wrong. And now, you are the ones with nothing. Sarah inhaled sharply, regaining some of her composure. John, we can talk about this. I scoffed. Talk. Oh, now you want to talk. Where was this energy when you were making plans to cut me out of my own company? Where was this energy when you were screwing him in my office, in my building, while texting about how pathetic I was? I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. I don't negotiate with traitors. Mark slammed his fist onto my desk. You don't know what you're doing. You're screwing yourself over too. You need me. This company needs me. I laughed. Actually laughed. Need you? Mark, you were a pawn. A disposable, forgettable middleman Sarah used to prop herself up. You weren't here to run the company, you were here to make her feel powerful. And now, you're just another liability I've removed. His hands curled into fists. For a second, I thought he might take a swing at me. I hoped he would. I wanted to see him lose what little dignity he had left. But instead, he turned to Sarah, his voice low, seething. You said this was airtight. Sarah was still staring at me, still trying to calculate her next move. John, she started, her tone soft, fake, rehearsed. I know you're angry, and I get it, but you don't have to do this. We were a team once. We can figure this out. I leaned back again, smiling. You're right. We were a team. And then you decided to lay under your ex-husband on your desk while plotting to stab me in the back. So forgive me if I'm not in the mood to work things out. Her face twisted into something ugly, rage, frustration, desperation. She turned to Mark. We need to call our lawyers. I smirked. Go ahead. Just know that mine have been working on this for weeks. Yours? Well, let's just say they'll be reading these documents at the same time you are. Mark turned back to me, voice shaking with rage. You will regret this. I took another slow sip of my coffee. Oh, I really won't. The silence stretched. They both realized they had nowhere to go, nothing to fight with. They had walked into this office thinking they were in control, only to find out they had been outplayed before the game even began. And then, without another word, they turned and stormed out. I let them go. Let them walk past the employees they had once thought they ruled over. Let them hear the whispers, see the looks of quiet satisfaction from the people who had seen through them long before I did. I stood and walked to the window, watching as they stepped out onto the pavement. Sarah turned, looking up, searching for me. I lifted my coffee cup in a mock toast. She knew. She knew. I had taken everything. Sarah had always been a fool, but I had to admit, this was her grand masterpiece of stupidity. She had burned down our marriage, our life, everything we built together, all for him. For Mark Holloway. For the man who, in the end, wanted nothing more than the power she thought she could give him. Their downfall had been swift and absolute. My legal traps had left them scrambling, and after being humiliated in front of the entire company, they had no job, no influence, no future. But I wasn't done watching their empire of lies collapse. Sarah thought Mark would stand by her side. She thought he'd be there, ready to pick up the pieces, to hold her hand and whisper that they'd start fresh somewhere new. That they would rebuild, just the two of them. But Mark? He wasn't in this for love. He was in it for me. For my company, my wealth, my position. And when it became clear that Sarah was no longer a stepping stone to power, she was nothing to him. She found out the hard way. Days after the fallout, after our divorce papers were served and my company was firmly back in my hands, Sarah showed up at Mark's apartment, expecting comfort. I wasn't there, but I heard all about it. About how she arrived, still dressed in her perfectly tailored business attire, hoping to play the role of the woman scorned, looking for reassurance. And how Mark barely even opened the door. "How long did you think this was going to last?" he had sneered at her, standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "Did you really think we were gonna ride off into the sunset together? Jesus, Sarah." She had sputtered, hands shaking, eyes already welling with tears. But I left everything for you." "No," Mark corrected, smirking, "you lost everything for me." Big difference. The door shut in her face. Just like that, she was alone. She moved in with her parents after that. Back to the house she had grown up in, to the childhood bedroom she never thought she'd have to return to. It was a fitting end. She had spent our entire marriage thinking she was too good for me, always looking over my shoulder for something better, and now she had nothing but a twin-sized bed and her mother's nagging voice telling her she should have appreciated what she had. I should have felt satisfied. Maybe even victorious. But as much as I wanted to wash my hands of her entirely, there was still one thing left unresolved. Emma. I hadn't seen much of her since everything blew up. She had stayed with Sarah at her parents' house, keeping her distance from me. And while I wanted to believe she would eventually see the truth, that her mother wasn't some innocent victim, I knew that wasn't something I could force. So I waited. Then, one evening, I got a text from her. "Hey, can we talk?" Just like that, something cracked open in my chest. When she came over, it wasn't like before. There was no eye-rolling, no dismissive shrugs, no thinly veiled contempt. She looked tired. Lost. And for the first time, she looked at me, really looked at me, not as the villain in her mother's story, but as her father. We sat in the kitchen, silent for a moment, before she finally spoke. I went to see Mark," she admitted, voice small. I tensed, but kept my expression neutral. "Yeah." She swallowed, looking down at her hands. "I wanted to ask him why he left Mom. Why he just threw her away like that." I exhaled slowly. "And what did he say?" Her lips pressed together, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "He laughed. Of course he did. Mark Holloway was a lot of things, an opportunist, a backstabber, a fraud, but above all, he was a man who only ever cared about himself." I thought, Emma hesitated, her voice breaking just slightly. "I thought he loved her. I thought they were," she cut herself off, shaking her head, as if ashamed that she had believed in any of it. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "your mother thought she was building a future with him. She thought he was worth destroying our family for. But Mark was never in this for love. He was in it for what he could get. And when she had nothing left to give him, he left." She closed her eyes, nodding slightly. "I was so mad at you," she whispered. "I know. I thought maybe if she was happy, none of it would matter." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with something raw, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Regret. I was wrong. I let out a slow breath, the weight of weeks, months, finally easing just a little. "Emma, I know this has been hard. And I know you love your mom. I'm never going to ask you to choose between us. But I need you to know, I never wanted any of this. I couldn't let them take everything from me." She nodded again, wiping at her eyes quickly, like she didn't want me to see. "I get it. A pause. And I'm sorry. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my daughter back. And that? That was the only victory that ever really mattered. Sarah had made her choice. And she had lost. Mark had played his game. And he had lost. But me? I was still here. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to start over. Bye-bye.